Imagine a fiery morning in the heart of the ancient Persian Empire, 522 BC. As the scorching sun engulfs the palace of Susa, a fateful moment approaches. Cambyses II, the young heir to the throne of his legendary father Cyrus the Great, prepares to deliver a brutal sentence that will not only punish but also mark history. As the court looks on, an elderly judge named Sisamnes trembles as he awaits the verdict, a sentence that will make his own body an immortal symbol of justice betrayed. Amid the golden light pouring down from the dome of the Susa palace, a hoarse scream once rent the silence. It was not just the sound of a human life ending, but the opening bell of one of the most notorious punishments in history. A royal judge was flayed alive, and the skin was used to cover the throne where his son would continue to judge in his father's place. But what could have brought such a cruel end to a symbol of justice? To find the answer, we must go back to the years when Persian power encompassed an entire continent. From the mountaintops of Media to the plains of India, the imperial judiciary was more than just an instrument of rule. It was the lifeblood that kept the vast apparatus from falling apart. The royal judges, personally appointed by the king, were the voice of law, the shadow of the throne in every village, every city. Sisamnes, one of them, was a symbol of justice over the years. He has weighed the scales in complex cases, from land disputes between nobles to trials involving the fate of entire families. But in that position, he also faced a challenge as ancient as human history itself: temptation. According to the writings of Herodotus, the Greek historian known as the father of history, a dispute between two nobles became a fateful turning point. One side, realizing that it had no advantage in arguments, sought to tip the scales with pure gold. Sisamnes, thinking that a small case would not catch the eye of the young king Cambyses, who was busy with military campaigns, accepted bribes and issued a biased verdict. But he was wrong. Justice, in the eyes of that monarch, was never a small matter. And the final verdict handed down to Sisamnes would transform him from a living man into a living symbol of deterrence. But no great empire can survive without an effective communications network. And this is what led to the fateful fate of Judge Sisamnes. Unbeknownst to him, among those present at the trial was a secretary secretly loyal to a nobleman who had been wronged by his biased judgment. This silent witness secretly collected evidence of the bribes and personally presented them to King Cambyses, who had just returned from a military campaign in Egypt. Cambyses II was not a man to be trifled with. As the son of Cyrus the Great, who was praised for his leniency by the standards of his time, Cambyses was determined to prove himself no less strict but also powerful. When he received evidence of wrongdoing by one of his senior judges, he immediately ordered his arrest and summoned the entire court for a public trial. In the splendid hall of the royal palace, which had now become a place of impeachment rather than trial, Sisamnes was brought before the throne, with the king himself acting as supreme judge. Witnesses testified, documents were presented, and the undeniable truth forced him to bow and confess. But the confession did not save him from the anger that burned within the king. On the contrary, it confirmed the corruption that had eaten into the core of the legal system. The sentence was unforgiving: execution by flaying alive. The punishment was not only brutal, but also symbolic, carried out publicly as a living warning. The most gruesome part: the skin was to be stretched over the chair on which Sisamnes' son Otanes would sit in succession as judge. As the fateful morning dawned, the vast courtyard of the palace was packed with people. Nobles, merchants, administrators, and diplomatic representatives had all been summoned to witness a living demonstration of royal law, ancient Persian justice, a justice written in blood and pain. Chained and dragged into the middle of the courtyard, Sisamnes, the judge who had once weighed the scales for a vast region, was no longer a judge, but a living example of the consequences of betrayal of trust. There was no mercy. There was no turning back. In the center of the courtyard, a thick wooden table had been set up, surrounded by blazing furnaces, where the instruments of execution were heated red-hot. This was no ordinary execution. This was the ritual of flaying, a gruesome punishment refined by the Persians to the heights of cruelty. The goal was not simply to kill. The goal was to keep the victim alive as long as possible, feeling each layer of skin peel off, separated, each moment torn from human dignity. The executioners, specially trained to maintain maximum pain without causing immediate death, began their work. The knife was used to make incisions along Sisamnes' back, chest, limbs, as precise as if made by a surgeon. Then boiling water was poured over his skin to soften the connective tissue, preparing him for the next stage. Using curved, sharp tools like spoons, they slowly peeled his skin away, bit by bit, centimeter by centimeter, with chilling care. Screams pierced the stone, tearing the air of the palace, causing some witnesses to collapse, others to turn away, hands covering their mouths. But Cambyses, the young king who had ordered the execution, did not take his eyes off. He stood there, motionless as a stone statue, his eyes as cold as the skinning blade, remembering every detail as if carving a warning mirror into the stone. Death came hours later, not from a fatal wound, but from the body's inability to withstand shock, dehydration, and hypothermia, all of which combined to produce the slowest death a human could ever experience. And according to the historian Herodotus, Sisamnes remained conscious almost to the end. He knew that his flesh would not be buried, but preserved as eternal evidence of his irredeemable punishment. When Sisamnes breathed his last, his skin was washed, soaked in salt and chemicals, and tanned like animal skin. No tears were shed, no funeral oration was read. The skin was taken away and covered with a bench where his son, Otanes, would henceforth sit to judge in his father's place. It sounds like a nightmare, but to the Persians it was justice. Not only was it a continuation of the hereditary tradition of the ruling system, but it was also the king's way of inscribing a wordless lesson into the hearts of those who remained. Live. The law is no game, and traitors are stripped of body and soul. Cambyses, Herodotus tells us, whispered to Otanes on the day of his appointment, "Never forget whose skin you are passing sentence under." No one knows what Otanes thought, but he sat there, still judged, still lived, eventually became governor of Ionia, a sign that he had done his job. But did he always feel a cold breath on his back as he leaned back in his chair, a whisper from his dead father, warning him that true justice never sleeps? When the court fails, do the corpses become lessons? The story of Sisamnes and his cruel punishment not only exists in historical texts, but also leaves a strong mark on Western art. Nearly 2 millennia after the event, during the Renaissance, European artists rediscovered the story and recreated it through richly symbolic images. One of the most prominent works is the parallel series The Judgment of Cambyses, painted by the Flemish artist Gerard David in 1498. Commissioned by the mayors of Bruges to be displayed in the town hall, the painting depicts in detail both the arrest and the torture of Sisamnes, namely his flaying while still alive. If one looks closely at the upper right corner of the flaying scene, one will see a small but meaningful image. Sisamnes' son Otanes is sitting on his father's leather-covered chair. This detail not only evokes personal tragedy but also serves as a visual statement about how power can operate through deterrence. The choice of this theme for public spaces is not accidental. During the Renaissance, the story of Sisamnes was often interpreted as a stark warning about the dangers of corruption in the judiciary and the need for absolute integrity from judges. Many public buildings, especially those housing judges or administrators, displayed depictions of the story as a permanent reminder. Among the artists who continued to depict the theme is Willem Isaacs van Zwanenburg, who depicted Cambyses ordering the execution of Sisamnes in a 1607 print based on a painting by Joachim Witteweil. Once again, the detail of Otanes sitting on his father's leather chair appears, emphasizing the symbolic value of this object. Even in the 21st century, the story continues to be relevant. In 2012, a group of protesters held up a copy of Gerard David's painting in front of a Moscow court during a controversial trial on political freedoms as a protest against judicial corruption. The story is not only about justice, but also raises questions about the line between punishment and political terror. By modern standards, execution by flaying is considered inhumane and unjustifiable. However, in ancient times, public executions were sometimes used as a means of intimidation and education. From this perspective, Cambyses' actions can be understood as a deliberate message of power within the Persian royal justice system. The transformation of Sisamnes' body into a chair, an object of public service, was not only a form of corporal punishment, but also created a lasting symbol of the justice or intimidation of power. The chair covered with human skin became a living warning. The story of the 18th century was a powerful and influential tale for the keepers of justice in the vast and diverse Persian Empire. In a world without the checks and balances of modern democracies, the integrity of judges was the foundation of political trust and stability. Although much of the story was only recorded by Herodotus, a historian who lived a few generations later, its credibility is bolstered by other accounts from Persia and Assyria, where flaying was practiced. These accounts show that cruel punishments were not just a product of the imagination, but were a real fact in the way ancient civilizations exercised state power. Is justice bleeding? The story of Sisamnes, the judge who was flayed alive, continues to haunt the conscience of humanity, an indelible scar in the collective memory of the betrayal of justice. He is not just a man, but a living symbol of what happens when the power of judgment is sold for greed. Today, although there are no longer human skin chairs in the courts, the Sisamnes chair is still present in the mind every time an unjust sentence is issued. Every time the public's trust is cracked by judicial scandals, the message that history sends that corrupted justice must pay the price still resonates through time, stronger than ever. In the Groningen Museum, Gerard David's brutal painting depicts the judgment scene in shocking detail, not only as a work of art, but as a mirror of time reflecting on ourselves. Viewers stand before it not only to contemplation, but to question. Have we really moved beyond the age of Sisamnes?